So how's it going, my comic chat army? We're here today with Drew Edwards, the creator of Halloween Man. How you doing, Drew?
Howdy. I'm doing good. I'm hanging in there. We're recording this kind of in the last march towards Halloween, which is, as you can imagine, always a really busy time of year for me.
I was gonna ask that. How does Halloween Man sell good all year round, or do you have like a spike in October?
It does well all year round, surprisingly. Actually, I just did a marketing meeting with some people, and it turns out that our second best month last year was, oddly enough, March, which is like worlds away from Halloween. But we do indeed get a spike in October. Interest in the character are obviously ramps up, and as a creator too, like when you sort of brand yourself the October guy, right around mid-September you start getting lots and lots of calls for personal appearances, for interviews, for things like that. And this month has been no different. In fact, I would say it's actually been a little bit busier than normal. I Despite the fact that I did not go to New York Comic Con, which I normally do in October, um, I have done 5 events already just locally here in Texas, and I am doing 3 more before the month is over. And outside of you, I have one text interview that I am working on and one more podcast interview. So there's still a lot of Octobering, for lack of a better term, left for me to do.
Oh yeah, that's cool that you're in Texas. There's a lot of creators in Texas.
I'm sorry, what
Um,
was that? You kind of broke up.
I'm sorry. I said it's cool that you're in Texas. I've interviewed a lot of creators that are in Texas.
Yeah, Texas has a surprisingly big indie comics scene. I mean, just here in Austin alone, I can think of just off the top of my head, we got Dan Price, who does Bigfoot Knows Karate,
Mhm.
Latex Avenger, Monica Gallagher, who does Assassin Roommate and Bonnie and Collide and Biggest Bigfoot. Um, there's Paulo Hernandez, Shane Campos, John Goulson. That's just off the top of my head. If I sat there and just tried to list all the people I know there in the comics business here in Austin, we could probably fill our entire time. Texas and Austin in particular, for some reason, just has a lot of comic book creators. And I think when people think of comics, Texas isn't necessarily the first place they think of. A lot of the times, naturally, people think of New York City because that's where Marvel and DC started. But Texas has a respectable amount of comic book in its blood.
Sweet. So do you have your own publishing company, or do you publish Halloween Man strictly by yourself?
So I have worked with a lot of different public. Halloween Man has been around, almost 23 years, and I've worked with a lot of different publishers. I've worked with, Devil's Due, Image Comics, Monsterverse. Um, you know, Comixology was the last home of Halloween Man. Currently, we're very focused on the digital, and we're making our bread and butter over on Global Comics. That's comics with an X. And those guys are, my partners in putting out Halloween Man. As far as the print versions of Halloween Man, currently that is all me. But so if you see Halloween Man at a convention or at a bookstore or something like that, that means the retailer got it directly from me right now. But I am kind of working to change that, because like we're blowing up on global comics. Like Halloween Man is the most popular it has ever been right now, and global comics has been a big part of that. But what I want is to get a new print partner, so we can make those inroads back into comic book stores and get those physical copies more easily into the hands of people who want them. And because like right now, it sure as heck seems like there is a lot of people who do want those.
Oh yeah, I definitely want physical copies. Just what little bit I've seen from googling stuff for the thumbnail, it's very cool.
Thanks, Os.
So what's the elevator pitch for Halloween Man?
So when I'm at a convention, and let's say you were to come up to me at a convention, and I would say this. I would say Halloween Man is the weird adventures of a zombie superhero and his sexy mad scientist girlfriend as they fight everything from vampire dinosaurs, Bigfoot, the Invisible Man, Mr. Hyde, evil Christmas trolls, etc., etc., etc. It's very quirky, very weird. He eats his bad guys. He's a monster that eats other monsters, so he's kind of top of the food chain of that world. It's a little bit Fantastic Four. It's a little bit Adam's Family. There's a lot to like in Halloween Man, especially if you march to a beat of your own drummer.
So is this based in a world where like humans are there too, or is it just monsters?
No, there are humans. Halloween Man takes place in the uh, fictional city of Solar City, Texas, which is where the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex would be in our world. So it's this massive retro futuristic city that has flying cars, it has robots, it has ray guns, it has superheroes. Um, but it also is haunted by ghosts, by witches, by vampires. So you have this like juxtaposition of this sort of optimistic futurism versus folkloric horror and gothic monsters and things like that. Because when I created the world, I wanted to go big on all the stuff that I'm interested in. So of course there had to be monsters, but I'm also a big 50s 60s sci-fi guy. So I wanted the sort of elements of what they thought the future was going to be like back in the 50s. So, I wanted flying cars, I wanted jetpacks, I wanted, that kind of vibe to it. So, it's not our world precisely, even though there is stuff that would be recognizable about it. But it's a world that fits the sort of elevated operatic characters that we're focusing on.
Okay. Um, you said you've been doing this for 23 years, you said?
I might be off on my math. It might be 24. Like I over 2 decades at this point. If it was a kid, it would be old enough to be getting married at this point.
How has indie comics changed over the last 20 years?
Oh man. So when I started out Halloween Man, I was barely out of high school, and I originally did it as a web comic, and to give you an idea of how long ago this was, web comics were a very like a relatively new thing. This idea of putting comics up on the internet. Now it's quite common, but I've seen indies, like there was that web comics bubble, and then it kind of burst there for a few years, and it seemed like Marvel and DC were gonna go back to just sort of dominating the industry again. And then I think with like things like Indiegogo and things like Kickstarter, and this sort of rise of like crowdfunding, I've seen indie comics come back in like this major huge way. And then we have digital platforms like webtoons, like global comics, like Comixology come up. And I think indie comics now are probably bigger than they have been since like the 80s black and white boom that gave us stuff like the Tick and Ninja Turtles. I there's just like so much variety of stuff right now, and I feel really blessed to have kind of weathered the storm that was sort of the mid aughts to about 2015 thereabout, where indie comics were really struggling, because there was like just so much focus on the direct market. And I love my comic book shops, but it's hard to get in there and compete with big corporate entities like Marvel and DC, because you just don't have a megaphone big enough to compete with like icons like Spider-Man and Batman. Like it's just like these are some of the most famous fictional characters that ever have been. But again, I think crowdfunding and then digital platforms have really changed the game, because you can have something that is more of a niche market, but it'll survive, and in many cases it'll thrive, and it'll find an audience that is like very specific. Like a great example, I already name dropped him once, but Dan Price, the guy that does Bigfoot Knows Karate, like he blows up on Kickstarter. Like he just slams it every time. And I think a book like his would have really struggled, and perhaps like the earlier part of this century, whereas like his time is sort of now. Like people hear the name Bigfoot Knows Karate, and they get intrigued, and they're going to go look at that, and they're going to back it. And the same is true when you hear something like Halloween Man, because it sounds quirky, and that doesn't necessarily fit into a big corporate behemoth's idea of what is marketable. But you can find that audience, and you can prove that you can say, like, we just crossed our 90,000th view on Global Comics. That's nuts to me. Like I can
Congratulations.
barely, thank you. I can barely wrap my head around that though as a number. So like it's it's just been really gratifying. And I think, again, I think indie comics right now, like, it is our time. I think we're going to start. I think what you're going to start to see within the next couple of years is indie comics are going to start to drive the industry again in a way that maybe hasn't been seen since the birth of Image. Like I firmly believe that.
I was talking about that with somebody else. Like if we could have like a diamond just for indie comics, that would be cool.
I don't doubt that somebody smarter than me will probably come up with something like that. I've heard rumblings of different people talk about ideas like that, because you know Diamond really isn't the powerhouse that it once was. It still has a lot of power, but um I think there's a lot of, especially since COVID, I think that there's been a lot of leveling up of the playing field in terms of the direct market. Like Marvel and DC had all the power, and now that the distribution model is started to sort of be rethought, I think that the time is right for somebody really to come in and say, okay, what's going to be the next Ninja Turtles? What's going to be the next Tick? What's going to be, the next Mystery Men? There's all the Hellboy, whatever. Like there's all these indie titles that were, became legendary back in the 80s and 90s. And I think we're going to start to see, the next round of that, where you get these iconic indie characters that become, what Batman and Superman were, and what's Fantastic Four and Spider-Man were, those kind of things, like where you see like an indie character become this really iconic figure. Like I that makes me smile because I love indie comics. I love the variety. I love that indie comics can be about anything from following the life and times of like a roller derby girl to a Bigfoot that knows karate. Like there's just like so many crazy varied things when you like if you go to Artist Alley and you see the passion of all these creators, you see a lot of innovation too.
So, do you kickstart all of your books?
I don't do all of them. I was actually just saying to a publisher friend of mine last night that crowdfunding is kind of a full-time job, and making the comic is already a full-time job. So it's difficult. I have done a lot of crowdfunding. I'm probably going to be launching a new crowdfund sometime within the next few months. But I up until this last year, I've been concerned that my fan base wouldn't sustain more than one crowdfund a year. Like I really worried about that, so I tended to just do one and not, because I know people that they do Kickstarter after Kickstarter after Kickstarter,
Mhm.
and I marvel at that, but I just don't have the stamina for it. And now I think I probably am at the point where enough people read Halloween Man that I probably could crowdfund, be it on Indiegogo or Kickstarter or whatever, Patreon, one of those, and I think it would be able to work. But a lot of the times, honestly, in terms of funding the comic, what I end up doing is I raise the money myself, either through taking, odd jobs. Like I was a butcher for many, many years. I've been a truck driver. I've done things like that. I have a very blue collar attitude about my, making my comics and everything, and I'll do whatever I have to do to get the money to make it. And you know, that kind of changed a little bit during COVID because there was a lot of creative grants and things like that. So I became more reliant on like state grants and national grants, things like that for the arts. But um, you know, I, however I can do it, I try to make the money, and because you know it's it's a tough business, and you want to make sure that you can keep the people that you're working with paid, and that if somebody wants a book, you can print a book for them. Like when I hear stories about people who do crowdfunding and they don't fulfill their perks, it kind of makes my butthole clench up a little bit, if you excuse my French, because I just think there's something inherently wrong about that. Like, I always want to be smart enough with my money that if somebody wants a book, I'll be able to get them a book, you know?
Right. Well, speaking of getting the book, where can everybody get a copy?
So right now, the best way to get a copy, first of all, you can reach out to me. My email is drewedwards@gmail.com. Or if you follow me on social media, just come over and say hi. I like it when people say howdy. I'm a friendly guy. You can private message me, and we'll figure out a way. But you can also you can order it on Indie Planet. That's indie with a Y, and you can get physical copies right there, like that. There are a decent amount of indie friendly retailers scattered throughout the country that do carry it. So if you're lucky enough that you can find it in your local comic book store, that's great too. If you're a digital person, obviously, I've plugged them enough, but I'll plug them again. Global Comics, that's comics with an X. You go on there right now, and you can have that instant gratification kick. You can jump on there. You can read Halloween Man tonight, and we just put out a new book. So please, help us continue to get those numbers up higher.
Well, is there anything you want to say before we go?
I've had a great time talking to you. Thank you for having me on the show. And I guess for those of you who haunt social media, if you want to follow me on Instagram, my Instagram is Drew_Halloween. And like I said, you can contact me on there. And other than that, happy Halloween, y'all.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come talk with me.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on. It was fun.
What? You mean you haven't subscribed to Comic Chat Authority? Oh, come on, subscribe already. What are you waiting for? It's no big deal. Like, man, don't forget to tell him to hit that like button. Yeah, that too. Just subscribe.